Hi guys, my name is Borodante, and welcome back to Overpaint. Which means I go through my Patreon page and I'll check out all the artwork that you guys submitted during the previous month of April. From now on, this is gonna be my consistent schedule, so the first Monday of the month, I work through all the submissions of the previous month. And I'll get right to it after a quick word about this channel's sponsor Wingfox, and their new course called an in-depth tutorial in creating key art illustration for game and film. Now your tutor is a professional Malaysian artist, Eugene Low. He worked on a couple of movies, cinematic trailers, and also worked with Square Enix on a cinematic trailer. And he will tell you about creating a key illustration for a project, be it a movie or a game, which means you're creating a fully detailed, fully rendered, beautiful image to illustrate what the project will be about. So the main big image that will tell the most about the way the project should feel and what key moments it involves. And throughout the course, you're going through sketching stages, value blocking, coloring, then rendering and color grading and final touches. All of it takes 12 hours. Eugene will be talking about all aspects about rendering materials, the geometry. I really like his dynamic perspective in here and good work with anatomy composition. You'll be working with the thumbnailing, human proportions. You see several stages of sketching, using a certain stylized and very interesting photo bashing that applies the photo in a way that it doesn't break out of the actual art style. Now, this course will begin in 2 weeks. And before that, it's in the fundraising stage where you pay $39 to get access to the lessons as they start releasing in 2 weeks. But from that moment when it starts releasing, it will be $69. So make sure to check it out earlier than later. The affiliate link is in the description. First patient, Mia. Welcome back, Mia. Hi Boro, it's me again with another Dungeons & Dragons character. This time it's a dwarf. I've been trying out some new painting methods, and this time I started with a light base tone and went darker instead of my usual method, which is the opposite. I recently said to someone that I go from dark to light, usually, but I don't know, it may be kinda different. Although I'm generally pretty satisfied with it, there's one thing bugging me that I couldn't quite rectify. The whole portrait is pretty brown and red without many other colors to balance it. I'm not sure how to introduce other colors into the skin in a natural way. I tried it a bit, but it just didn't work out. It always looks so weird. Also, if you can help a bit with the slight top-down angle I was going for, that would be a huge help. Oh yeah, I went quite a lot on that last subject. Generally, I really liked the picture, that's why it's probably the thumbnail of this video. So let's see what my starting thoughts were. Alright Mia, I'm actually really happy that you submitted this artwork, because since the previous Overpaint, I'm actually really interested in drawing faces from different angles. And in this case, we have this top-down view. So a thing I can see that we should fix in the face is actually the kind of errors that you always see with a face drawn from up or down. And that is the fact that the face, while it also has some issues, it's actually almost drawn perfectly. Like we have certain changes that look like they give us understanding that we're looking from the top down. But the head, the rest of the features on the head, they don't really follow it. But it's not too drastic in here, like almost everything is drawn just right. I would maybe experiment with extending the distance that we give to the hair, since we should be seeing more of the top, but it's actually kind of here already, maybe a little bit, but generally the angle is not that strong, since usually when you like take a picture of someone top to bottom, the model usually also tends to tilt their head a bit upwards, so the angle on the face shouldn't be as strong as the angle on the body. So this may be just about enough, so I don't think it's a big issue. One issue that's definitely there is the position of the ear. It's actually maybe a bit too low even for just a perfectly frontal shot. So we have the eyebrow line, and for the frontal shot, like let's say the eyebrows are a bit raised in this case. So if we account for the raised eyebrows, it's exactly where the ear should be. So when we draw a head from the front, it would be looking like that. And the tips of the ears will be over here at this line, and this line is actually the eyebrows line. So it's usually aligned very consistently. But from the top, it would be a bit like this. Like I'm not doing a very strong angle, just a little bit. And the eyebrows will be here, while the ears will be already very much over there. Since the distance in depth between the eyebrows and the tips of the ears is pretty big, bigger than any features on the face, we get a stronger parallax, meaning the difference in movement of something that's further away comparing to something closer. So the ear definitely should be somewhere around over here. Aside from that, I also looked up some of the photos that are at this angle, and I noticed that even if the model is raising their eyebrows, it will still be pretty much touching the eyes visually, so that's where the eyebrows will be. And it actually makes total sense because when we look upwards, like really to the maximum of our abilities, we just have to raise the eyebrows because they're literally in the way. So when we raise them, they're probably just exactly where we need them so they wouldn't obstruct our vision. Hence such a small distance between the eyebrow and the actual eye. So it makes total sense that it's really close. Another thing, usually on the photos and when you just look at people from top to bottom, the tip of the nose is pretty close to the upper lip. And maybe that's why, like, since the distance is pretty big, that's why it feels a little bit like the mouth is sort of stretched downwards, like the character is making that kind of expression, moving their mouth a bit lower, and it feels a bit awkward. So maybe if we move it a bit higher, it would actually look a lot more natural and relaxed. One more thing about just the colors, you mentioned you wanted to balance out a lot of the red in the image. Well, not really an issue, of course. It's not a problem for someone to have like a lot of red in their appearance. I immediately thought of just making the background, of complementary color. It would immediately balance out the presentation of the character overall, but you probably weren't talking about that. You were talking about just the design of the character or the way you show them in any condition to make their appearance a bit more balanced out in terms of gamma. In that case, sort of to add this artsy, colorful rendering in a way, maybe you would call it color abstraction, but not necessarily. What I would do is simply I would add some of the Fresnel reflection of like the surrounding world, especially on the shaded areas. That's where you have a lot of freedom in terms of adding any colors you want, because whenever the surface becomes darker, that's where you can add all kinds of colors and use reflection as an excuse. The darker the surface, the more reflections take over. So just adding that color everywhere and maybe switching sometimes to something a bit more saturated and stronger to see how it works, here and there. Who knows what's around this character, maybe there's a lot of blue, and I mean blue is the color of the sky, so there's always a lot of that. So yeah, by playing around with that, maybe just using the color blending mode and it just doesn't affect any values, just changing the colors. But really, I think I even adapted it more myself because blue is generally just darker than red. So I added all of this by just adding a new layer and painting with a very low opacity in this layer. This way you literally add something the way the reflection would work on a surface, not really destroying any details, just adding some new colors, slightly different values on top. Yeah, with the face I would be more accurate, that's for sure. More cautious. It shouldn't be that blue because there's a lot of other skin around it. There's not a lot of ways to justify that reflection of blue in here. So closer to the edges, totally fine. So yeah, after a little while of extra work, I went from this to this. And as I was looking at it today, a couple of things I still feel like I should be fixing. I already fixed the nose a bit to not make it broken to the left like that, but I think I should do more of that. It still kind of looks broken. And also, there will probably be much whiter eyeballs because they're really red. They were like that in the original. So yeah, later on, I'll make sure that our dwarf is not high and her eyeballs are actually white. Next patient, Digital Replicant. Hi, Replicant. Hello Boro, you've been such an inspiration to my digital art development over the last 2 years, and I'm a huge fan of the light-shadow play you incorporate into your works. That was reading in one take. That doesn't happen a lot. I'm still very new to using advanced art programs, Clip Studio, but I always get excited to try out what I learned from your videos on the art I make for my Elder Scrolls story. My friend bought me a subscription to your Patreon and encouraged me to submit my recent piece to Overpain, since I am always talking about what I've learned from you. Oh, that's very nice. Much of this piece was inspired by a few of your recent episodes about using shadow to hide detail while using the light source to suggest it. I use a lot of glowing effect in my artwork simply because I think it looks neat and it carries a magical feel. It sure does. Please be gentle. Thank you so much for your consideration and for continuing to encourage and inspire budding digital artists. Happy to do so. Now let's see what happened. Wow, this is a pretty intense picture. It actually has a very well put together atmosphere. There are two things that should be approached a bit differently in here that would probably bring the picture to a bit of a next level in terms of making it much more striking and readable about what it is. So first of all, I think the work on the values, I feel like certain details of anatomy are a bit off. So the lighting frequently on muscles is made by using a big soft brush. This is what it feels like. In many areas in here, they have this really soft gradient all over them, and it just makes the whole picture turn into these big blobs of soft spots, and they don't really look the way a lit body would look like. So that would truly improve the picture in here, because right now, just the bodies of the characters, they feel a bit kind of weird, like they have these super unusual geometries or something, like everything feels really weird because the light isn't really dictating the proper shapes of muscles and everything. So overall, this is also connected to just understanding the anatomy. Another thing is obviously, I think these mysterious creatures, their chest parts, they just need to be like lower. I think they're just a bit too high. So simply at least doing that, I think would work much better or something. And also they kind of, well, they shine quite a lot. Obviously there was kind of an intention in that, but maybe making it a bit more subtle would first of all look more realistic, because the rest of the body is covering them from getting so much light. Another thing is that while many of the shading I really like, as you mentioned, you appreciated my video about, actually losing details in the shadow, which is something you should do if you're trying to paint a dark image. I feel like you're trying to achieve that by using that big soft brush, using black color and darkening areas. And by the way, if I just do something like this, literally all the details are in place, even this in here, which is kind of weird. Like, you literally didn't have to think through that, work on that at all. It could be just painted black, because the pants would cast a shadow on that thing that, I don't know, right now I don't see it at all, only if I raise the values. They expose a lot of work that no one will see, but that's another subject. I guess you are trying to figure things out. But generally, because you are working with that big soft brush, it kind of makes the whole scene sort of fall apart a bit into just a bunch of bright purple spots in just black space. Maybe I would support the silhouette of this demon woman right here with a bit of a stronger aerial perspective, for instance. And that way I wouldn't have to light her up from that side that actually doesn't seem to have the light source from that part. So especially this leg, like there's no way, actually having a dark side in here, completely dark, just don't add any kind of rim lighting. It will actually bring an interesting effect in here, because before that, you are defining this whole character mainly with just the outlines of this rim lighting everywhere. But this way, we'll get to support them with their actual silhouette. So when we zoom out, it's the black silhouette, the black spot that we'll see. instead of just separate lines. So we're actually seeing the shape now. And same thing would go in here. It can be very subtle. I can tone down that aerial perspective in here pretty rapidly and generally make it a bit more dim. But because I will actually use the silhouette instead of outlines, it will look much more striking and readable. And for most parts, we can work with that kind of thing. And yeah, some of the values on the main character here, maybe I would light up things a bit more to actually have defined anatomy here and there. It requires some search. I'll try to figure it out. So I'll just go ahead and do that. But one more thing before I start, this glow right here. While it's really cool and everything, I really feel like maybe I haven't seen a single like truly, high quality rendering of something in 3D or whatever it would be, some kind of magic, where such a huge surface of this bright cyan would be happening in the glow, and it wouldn't actually turn into white in the center. It feels like it's flattening out in the spot, for some reason not turning into white. I'm not saying completely white, but like much brighter center. I feel like his eyes would truly benefit from that. It would actually bring in that appropriate gradient of the bright glow. So as I mentioned before, right, the white center with a colorful crown makes a bright, colorful glow of any sorts. And right now we have this, instead of this kind of flat look, something anticlimactic happening in the center of these eyes. And in here, they're truly glowing now. So yeah, that was a little extra remark right there. And yeah, after a little work, I got from this version to this version. You know what's interesting when I'm comparing it right now? In the original, pretty much all the characters were brighter, but they were less visible. Like, I pretty much shaded down everything. I removed a lot of the rim lighting and such, but I added the background aerial perspective and it changed everything quite a lot. And yeah, some anatomy fixes here and there worked out pretty well, I think. Also, in here, these colors were really weird. If something is glowing, it should be brighter than the color of the glow. I'm pretty sure you know that, Replicant. You probably just missed that. So yeah, I don't know if everything I did is only better, but I think it is. Next patient is Kitten Spell. Hi, Kitten Spell. Hey yo, Boro! I've been a silent supporter for a while now and thought that after saving enough, I'd pledge to Patreon and show support in that way as well. Thank you, I greatly appreciate that. Your videos have been insanely helpful in my art journey. I had almost zero knowledge of any art terms. For example, my favorite I've learned from you, aerial perspective. Yeah, it took me a while to actually start calling it that. At first I was calling it air perspective, and you guys were constantly talking about that, so thank you. This is a painting I've finished recently where I used a lot of the tips you've given in your past content. I think it's easy to see that I'm most confident in painting faces, but the rest doesn't match as well as I'd hope. I struggle a lot with hair and clothing, and also my color choices. If you had any advice on how to take something like this and make it more polished, cohesive, I would really appreciate that. Yeah, well, let's see how I'll be able to improve this picture. Oh, also, by the way, this was the first submission I worked on while traveling, and it was recorded on my iPad with a smaller microphone in a room with poor acoustics, so prepare yourselves for a much worse sound quality. Alright, Kitten Spell, you have a very witchy style, which is pretty cool. So you wanted to push this artwork to make it a bit more polished and look more like a final product or whatever. So my best way to make that happen is probably thinking through the lighting and maybe taking some different choices in some areas and paying attention to the shading of each of the elements on the image. So first of all, let's look at the hair and think about adding some more real shadows, like deep shadows. The whole object of hair in here, it's just shades of blue, but it never reaches that black. Well, we see that the hat is actually getting much darker, so it makes little sense that the hair is almost like slightly glowing, and we would really benefit from adding the deep shadows to it. Like in here, we have a pretty big shadow because there's the whole head, and this is the sort of a back plane of that hair, so it needs to have a lot of that shadow cast from the head. And you can see it's adding that real, like, true depth to the picture that it was really lacking. And there's more areas where we can add that as well. Another thing is I can see that many elements in here are shaded relatively well, like they have the full shading, but they still rely on the outlines quite a lot. And maybe you keep those because you just want that art style, or maybe you find it hard to just get rid of the outlines because the objects sort of blend together, like this finger, this thumb, would blend with the face, which is probably the main issue when you try to get rid of the outlines in your artwork. And the solution to that is simply to, again, truly think through the fully three-dimensional shading. So thinking about where objects are and how they are covered with other things. Like, for instance, the left side of the face, it will be pretty shaded because there's this big coin, and the thumbs, they're casting quite a lot of the shadow on the face. So overall, it would be relatively darker, but not as dark as the bottom plane of the thumb right here. It may actually get this dark of a color because that plane is actually facing downwards, when the cheek here can only face sideways and getting some of the shadow from the hand and the coin. So it will be like mid-dark or something like that. But yeah, the main idea is that we don't need any outlines, including this completely unjustified rim lighting outline, like the light one. We have a cylindrical finger, more or less. It's a more complex shape, of course, but it's basically a cylinder, and we should shade it like a cylinder. So it will be pretty dark at the bottom and pretty light at the top. By the way, which is a thing that's interesting, generally the thumb has, in the original here, it has like a hint of shading from the top, I guess. Like the bottom edge is kind of dark in here, and the top edge has this rim light. Well, I think it's kind of just artistic freedom, so to speak, since this plane right here is like having this rim light from the side now. But I think to push things forward, we need to truly think about where that lighting is and work with that in any detail. And also maybe making this area of the palm a bit less weird. I think there needs to be a bit more meat in this area, especially when the thumb is kind of like stressed. There's tension going on, so the muscles will be contracted. But yeah, generally doing this kind of shading, I would say that would be almost enough to just completely finish this painting and make it look completely different, like on a very different level. Like the eye in here as well, it has like this red glow, or this is the way you were adding this red color to the eye. But thing is, when there are shadows, and there should be some, since the eyelid that has this massive makeup on it, I guess, it will actually introduce a relatively deep shadow. And it just won't look right until you actually show it. So just choosing this darker color, like truly going for much closer to black in there, I think it will look way better already. Like this feels like the eye is kind of flat and not alive. And this way it's truly an eye with the depth. So yeah, depth is like the key word in this overpaint, I think. One more thing I wanted to say, while this is really just your choice, you decided to go with that, obviously intentionally, I would just recommend moving the light source a little bit on the face. Right now it's like literally from the camera, like this is a photo with a flash. I would recommend moving the light source a bit to the top. Obviously, there's a hat that would cast a shadow, and maybe we could, introduce a little bit of that, like cast a bit of a shadow there, something like that. And the fingers on the hand, they wouldn't be shaded that way because they stick out more and they would pop even more. That would be nice. So yeah, a little bit of shading like this, but more accurately. And then we simply reshade the face from the top. I feel like it would just make the whole face look a lot more interesting because this lighting exactly from the front is just not the best. Like, think about it, not the way you try to visualize a painting, but just a decision as a photographer, for instance, or when you take a selfie. You don't want to have this kind of lighting on your face. And I think this cool witch could also benefit from a more flattering angle of the lighting. I guess I would think a bit more on this little detail. It sort of makes the whole image looking a bit cheaper, So maybe a bit more of a deeper or maybe just richer effect to visualize this detail, because it doesn't really connect to the rest of the picture that is really rendered much better. And after a little work, I got from this to this. I think it's looking pretty nice. You can see how in the original the face and the hair and many big spots of anatomy they looked a lot more flat. And I just added those deeper shadows, especially the shadow of the curvature of the face, meaning the edges of the cheeks, they really go away inside the blue hair, so they get much darker, and I think that improves the depth of the rendering quite a lot. And yeah, by introducing this higher contrast values work, it's pretty easy to just get rid of those outlines and work with actual true painting and not drawing. Next patient. Title Beetle. Hi Beetle. Howdy Boro. I'm a newish artist that has learned basically everything I know from you. That's a lot of responsibility. Nah, this is my newest painting. I think it's decent, but something feels weird about it. Not in the good way. I was hoping you could make it more eye-catching. Yeah, well, let's see what I can do about this one. Alright, Title Beetle. More eye-catching and less weird in a bad way, more weird in a good way. I gotcha. I'm loving the idea, by the way. I don't know what it is, and I don't think I have to. It just looks really fun. But it does have certain issues that stop this picture from becoming something, you know, really well done, and it kind of feels like an accident and unfinished product because of that. And the main reason in here is not in the shading or anything, although some things I would change. I think the main problem is composition, and specifically cropping. I hate this part. I really hate this one, and kind of hate this as well. Also, I a little bit hate this, and some hate is in here as well. So we're gonna fix that. I have a problem with this because this is not the best choice of cropping, you know, where the edge of the canvas is going right next to the line of some object, and more than that, that object is not even perfectly aligned with the canvas, which looks really bad just because of that. I can see where you were going from trying to crop it like this, because it felt like, well, if you crop it somewhere, why not crop it exactly at the edge? That's sort of the point, right? It's intentional, but because it's like a perspective, it feels really unpleasant, unfortunately. Because of that. I think we need to really change this composition by adding more space in there to show a little bit of the shelves on that side, so we would have some space away from this handle of the refrigerator. And same thing in here, maybe we'll show some kind of different products in that side of the refrigerator. I hope this is not a sperm bank. I just thought of that suddenly. I mean, it wouldn't be alien to whatever the picture is already. But anyway, let's not think about that. Let's think about the composition. So in here, I think we don't need to see the whole height of these bottles in here. Exactly the half would be great. And same things goes in here, you know, just a perfect way to cut. Don't cut right at the event. You see, there's like a shelf floor, and that's where the cut is. There's a reason why they say, you know, anything important should be inside of the picture, and the edges of the canvas, the edges of the composition, they should be less eventful, less contrast and everything. That's because it's actually super unpleasant for many reasons to make it like this. And you see the whole cropping tool, it has the rule of thirds, and when I'm adding some of that width here and there, we are getting the face right into the thirds. I think I like it a lot as well. It's not necessary, we can push it a bit closer to the center, so it would be more like this. I think it would be a really good picture. I think since we're really close to a square in this case, like square proportions of the canvas, why not actually make it square? I think it can work. Like on the left, we definitely have enough space now. I think it will look just fine. On the right, yeah, I think if anything, we can go with just the square look. Maybe just enlarge a little bit to have a bit more space. Yeah, I would go like this. So I'll just paint more of the shelves on the sides to make it work. And one more thing I wanted to talk about is overall the contrast of the picture. I really like the way it looks with this low contrast and very light shadows. It makes sense with just overall feeling of this awkward softness. It's kind of a thing. I really like it. It gives a certain vibe to the picture, but also because this is like we're looking behind the glass of the probably a refrigerator, you know, to show that feeling of something being behind the glass, we make the shading a bit lighter, like a bit washed out. But to make sure that this is intentional and this is because the glass is like that, we need to shade the handles a bit darker. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna apply a much more, you know, full dynamic range to the shading of the handle and all that stuff. And maybe even the shelves that are really close to the glass, because whenever something's getting closer, it may almost not get its shading affected. So maybe a bit darker something, or brighter, like just higher contrast things where objects get much closer right to the glass. So maybe on these jars as well, something like that would take place. Of course, on top of that, it's a good idea to just put more details on everything. These jars, they're really just marked in almost, especially the top row and the bottom one. They're really vague. So just putting more details there would make it look a bit better. Maybe remove some of the jars from the front row, you know, maybe this jar would be absent and only the one behind it, a smaller and darker one, would be shown, to just add some events to the picture. It's a bit too repetitive. Maybe that's why you kind of gave up on shading all of them, because it was boring to you. But you know, usually whenever it's boring to you to paint, it's gonna be boring for the viewer to look at. It pretty much goes that way. So yeah, these are my thoughts. I'm not touching this creature. It looks just perfect, I think. So I worked on the piece a little bit more, and I got from this to this. So it really feels very different now. The original, I hope, feels like just an unofficial crop of the full composition, you know? I also changed the rendering of the jars a little bit by adding these sharper highlights. Even when you try to paint something like very vague like this, the highlights shouldn't be like a big spot like this, you know? Specifically, the highlight can be a lot sharper, and it immediately makes the whole thing a lot more detailed, because highlights on curved objects, they're always very tiny, and if you do it the right way, it feels like so much closer to the final product, even though you don't detail a lot of stuff in the shadows. Next patient, Tyler Sharon. Welcome back, Tyler. Happy Easter, Boro. LOL. Happy Easter, Tyler. I made this in a couple hours, but wanted some feedback from you. It's basically a halfway between realism and cartoon of an Easter Pikachu. My foliage/grass needs work. I did cheat on this one with a grass brush for the background-foreground grass to save time, as I wanted this to be done quickly. Any tips would be great. Thank you. Alright, Tyler, so I can see you had a lot of problems with the grass. So I'll just quickly go through some things that I think could be improved aside from it, and then we'll talk about the green elephant in the room. So, number one, the butterflies. There's 2 of them. While I can see this is like a postcard thing and everything, I really think 2 doesn't really look right. It needs to be either 1 or 3 or just a whole lot. But 2 feels really weird. Like, is there some kind of dialogue between these 2 butterflies, or are they doing something? It feels like it's not symbolic, so it should have like a story, but that's not the point. So it feels kind of weird. So I would add another butterfly literally right here. And it will have its wings specifically differently. And I think this butterfly also needs its wings to be like downwards. They all need to be in the different positions. It's another one of those situations where it feels boring to paint the butterfly again, so you just copy it. But really it's boring because you only thought of painting it in the same position, but really painting it in a different position is pretty much necessary in here. Again, because of the whole symbolical aspect of the picture, they need to have, you know, different things shown. If they all have the same position, in the language of painting, it pretty much feels like they're not really flying with their wings, but levitating. None of them actually move their wings at all. That's what it feels like when you have more than one butterfly and they all have the same just perfect spread of wings, and that's it. So yeah, that's why paintings are special. You need to make sure everything is, like, if there is a way to show things with greater variety, greater richness, and more of a fortunate appearance, you have to do it. If you don't do it, then why the hell didn't you do it? You know, it's like a mistake. So that's a thing. I'll probably put a bit more detail on it afterwards. Next thing is about shading the Pikachu and connected to it, making the sky a bit darker. It's too bright, and because of that, our white Pikachu is blending into it, and then it has also these colorful rainbowy electric charges, and all of them just white on white with white. It just lacks some contrast because of that. We need a darker background to show our bright Pikachu. So I just quickly drafted in some of the new sky color. I'll probably make it a bit more accurate and add some clouds as well. I think this is one of the illusions that you have sometimes when you like paint a sunny day. It feels like, well, it's just so bright, it would feel weird to draw like a deep dark blue sky. It feels like it's wrong and it will look incorrect, but it won't. If you paint all the objects in the scene actually brightly lit by the sun, it will look just right. It will look like a very bright scene. It's sunny and the sky is the way it should be. It's blue. So yeah, stick to blue sky. It's a good thing. So one more thing is the shading on Pikachu. I think we need to go much more with actually shading him from like a sunny direction. I really don't see a lot of shading on the bottom half, you know? And we should probably bring in some of the green, you know, reflected light from the grass because it's right there. So it will be like this main color all over the place for most shadows, especially on the white fur. And yeah, don't worry, with the environment that green right next to his body, he won't actually appear green. He will look like he just has this reflected light and it will look really awesome. So yeah, I'll be doing more of that, making sure that the top plane of his head in here would be the brightest, so it needs to be getting that real bright color at the top part. We're thinking that the sun is somewhere like this, maybe even a bit more vertical. So yeah, there's that. One more thing is I would probably add a much sharper highlight from the sun. Something like that, maybe a bit smaller. Like this highlight on the eyeballs, it's an important part of shading when a character is in the sun. If there is just this big, soft, and vague highlight at the top hemisphere, like why? Where's the sun then, you know? It feels really weird, like it doesn't fit in. In terms of grass, well, really, like you wanted to make it fast, I think you should have chosen just an expressive brush of sorts and just mark it in. Work from bigger shapes, make sure you define certain variety, don't just make repetitive things and that's it, you know? Things should change as they do. Some of the grass should definitely overlap the Pikachu right here. And after I mark in these bigger masses, I'll just break them down into smaller ones and making sure when I shade it, I will pay attention to the angle of the grass because these baked in grass brushes, they really don't have any changes, like any work on values of the grass because when it's tilting horizontal, it should be brighter than when it's a vertical one. That's the basic idea that you need to be following. And yeah, just work on the silhouettes like this, you know, by just finding bigger and smaller shapes. I feel like I keep repeating this, but you guys just need more practice in your brushwork. It's really important. Brushwork plus the shape design. Just experiment with what kind of shapes of any kind of mess, how it would look good and what makes it look bad when it's not working. And usually it's when you just make things too repetitive, have the same distances between different masses of the grass, and so on. So after quite a lot of work, most of which went on making sure I fit the new sky around all these sharp edges of the text, I went from this to this. So I think it's a pretty different picture. I barely actually touched Pikachu itself, like only made sure that it's shaded a bit brighter on at the top area, you know, with the egg as well, it's a bit brighter there. But mostly it was about the new sky because I think it was like the biggest mistake in here, having the sky so washed out. And of course the grass was painted completely differently. Obviously a very quick work. I think it should be considered quick, and yeah, I think it looks way better than any pre-baked stuff and blurs and all of that. If you want to save time, I think the best way to save time is sticking to one brush. At least it will take care of the consistent quality of the picture and you won't waste time trying to, you know, mask it out and try to do something about that. Next patient. Oh, it's actually Mia again. I didn't paint over this since this is the second one, but please don't roast my lazy background too hard. Yeah, that's fine. Maybe I would reposition it a bit to avoid these, you know, tiny aisles of light breaking between the fur and the triangle. But overall, like, it's fine. It's a thing. Design. Overall, I can say one thing I would fix, I would make one of the light sources much brighter. It seems like there are no light sources on this character at all. And also, maybe you shouldn't be using like this rim light type. I recommend not using that with a white background, because it really dominates over the picture and it feels like the darkest and least important part of the image. I think that's why it looks lifeless. You literally have very little going on in terms of contrast and definition in the main part. That's because it's like the darkest place in the image. Next patient is Giovanni. Welcome back, Giovanni. Hi again. I'm super happy for you being able to upgrade the overpaint tier. Oh yeah, this is the first $25 overpaint submission. Today I was studying the whole shadows have less detail concept, and I feel this painting came out really good. My hope is to see if you can help me with a little bit on the secondary light source, but if you notice anything else, I'll be more than happy to take notes on it. Postscriptum. I actually wanted to talk about it, and I hope you can help me on what I should do with focal points. My past few paintings, if it's not in the focal point, I don't work on it as much, but it comes out looking unfinished, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on the subject, and what should I do to improve such? Well, in terms of focal points and things not looking finished when you try to lower your level of detail, try working on the whole composition zoomed out. So this is your screen, and the picture should be like this, like with pretty noticeable fields everywhere. Not just fit to screen, but smaller a bit. And just work on it like you have no option to zoom in. Just don't touch it. It's so much better for many things, including working on the composition is much better because you can see the whole picture all the time. But also just try to detail it as much as you feel possible without zooming in. And then only for the main parts, the face and everything, you can zoom in and keep like adding a bit more precision. I think that will help you quite a lot because you will sort of finish the painting on that smaller level of detail when you zoom out, while it won't be as detailed. Now let's see what I did with this black and white samurai. Alright, Giovanni, let's see what we can do about improving something here. First of all, a really cool picture, I really like it. I think I can see the separate light sources pretty well, so we have one from the top like this, which is probably what you call a main light source, and another one is from over there, and it's a rim light. And we'll just mostly be talking about that, because I can see you're actually going for truly thinking through the lighting and everything, and let's think a little bit more on that and see how we can push things further. So one issue I had with the picture is when I looked at it and you mentioned the secondary light source and that you need help with it, I actually needed a second to analyze like what secondary light source, you know? But then after looking at it for a little while, I realized that you meant the rim lighting. So yeah, it's all fine. The only thing is I think we need to make this main light source specifically defined. I think some of the shadows need to be darker. In some areas we need to truly like get rid of the light, like the way you did on the nose in here. So you can see how the main light source ends at this edge, and then we have that dark area, and then the rim light is hitting it from the other side. And generally on the helmet we can see this area happening as well, so that's really cool. But some areas in here, they don't really do it. And also I think we need to work a little bit on, you know, thinking through the ambient lighting. There's actually like a third light in here, which is letting us see this area, like what is this lighting in here, right? And that's a good thing, because we would really lose a whole lot of detail in here. It would just blend into black. We wouldn't see the edge, like this edge of the arm would disappear. But I think we need to maybe introduce more of the ambient occlusion for this lighting. So that's one thing that would truly show that this is just ambient lighting, and the arm is right there next to the torso. And same thing, for instance, this shadow from the helmet onto the mask. I really think that our main light source would cast a pretty strong shadow in here, and it would be much darker. And when I do it, you can see we get a much stronger, cool looking depth from the helmet. And yeah, generally thinking through these really sharp, strong cast shadows from any details of the outfit onto their immediate neighbors. And in here, I'm also using this to make the torso a bit darker and casting the project shadow from this color thing, I suppose it's like a color, onto the torso. I like how you worked on the planes in this part. This shoulder shield on the side, it has several planes and each one of them is facing a bit of a different direction a little bit, getting more and more towards us. And because of that, each of the planes gets darker and darker, and you pretty much nailed it. The only thing is, again, I would add the projected shadows, especially like the more we turn away from that main light source, the longer these project shadows will be. So this one may be completely in that projected shadow in this case. And in here is just a quick stripe. One issue with generally that there's no brighter or darker objects. Maybe the neck seems like it's definitely darker than the mask and everything else, and maybe this color is a bit of a darker object, but generally everything is like just of the same mid-gray color, like not a lot of differences in values altogether of objects. Maybe these teeth on the mask, they should be brighter than the mask itself, because the mask is like usually red or something, right? And the teeth are, I think, most certainly gonna be white. In this case, I would maybe just make the actual teeth a bit brighter. Yeah, making the reflection on the eye more horizontal, since the environment is generally having this horizontal spot of light, which makes sense. It looks like some kind of environment, you know? But yeah, on the eye, no matter how the helmet is tilted, the world reflected in it will still be horizontal. So yeah, you see I'm making the mask darker and the teeth brighter. It's looking pretty cool, I think. The shading of these fur type of surfaces in here, or whatever it would be, they will have actually a pretty strong contrast. The stronger the angle and the bigger these fibers or hairs are, the higher contrast simply you will be getting. This is the area of a very stretched Terminator, where a lot of the texture is very exposed. And of course, same goes for the rim light in here. Some of the hairs will be catching that super strong rim light even at a certain distance from the edge. Same thing you did in here, obviously it's the same logic. You see, on one hand, you could have a pretty shiny rim light on that pinky, but on the other hand, you could cast a cool deep shadow from the ring finger onto the pinky. And that will look really legit, like you can see the strong evidence that these two fingers are one next to another and that the light is actually coming from the back. It's almost perfect, but in details, sometimes it could pay off to be a bit more precise. Like I would probably make a much darker shading in here, because this angle, like you can see this light source, the main light source, it won't be reaching this plane at all. It's like facing away from it. So that means this part is only lit by the rim light. And it will give us a super strong shading where, well, not going into completely black away from the rim light, but getting kind of close to that, because the ambient lighting is still pretty dark. So the bottom plane will be darker than the top plane, but I'm avoiding covering up the rim light, of course. So like this, where there is no rim light and no main light. In this case, it's where it's facing downwards like that. And after spending some more time with that, I got from this version to this. So yeah, as I usually go, pretty much everything got darker. More contrast in this area feels a lot more appropriate, because this felt really like it's fluffy on the edge, but almost like a flat surface in here when it comes to actually shading it from the front. Not 100% on making the mask darker, like it does look darker now, but maybe I drew too much attention away from the face this way. So yeah, just look up references where the mask actually reads better or something. I don't know. Now, next patient is Ben Gibson. Hi, Ben. Hi, Boro. I recently rediscovered your channel after not watching for years, and I've been loving the Overpain episodes you've been putting out. Thank you and welcome back. This is a piece that I did last month as a kind of splash art for a character that I designed for my university final project. This idea for this piece is that he is standing in front of an army of his ghostly followers, striking a pose to showcase his design. A selfie, I see. I wanted to make it as dynamic and interesting as I could in order to kind of replicate the cinematic feel of splashes found in League of Legends and Legends of Runeterra. In the end, I learned a ton and was happy with how it came out, but felt like it could have been better overall. Any words of advice for breaking into the industry would be greatly appreciated too. On breaking into the industry, make sure you have a LinkedIn page. Make sure it's nice and directly focused on what kind of job you want to get. That's my strategy on the industry. Now let's see what I did with the picture.
Alright, Ben. First of all, really liking the artwork. I think it's really awesome stuff. I think there's like very little things to change about it. And let's start with composition. While it's almost perfect and I'm not 100% sure on what the requirements are for their splash art, like this particular one, but I feel like the head of the character just has to be lower. That's too close to the edge. Maybe not that zooming out, but a little bit and then going lower overall. Something like this. Now, the next thing I would fix is I would probably make the sky a bit darker. So I'll probably go with like this color, and that is to get the rim lighting on our character. Because we have this super bright sky right behind the character, our rim lighting highlights, like this one on the top of the helmet, it really blends together with the sky, and we're losing the most important part, which is the silhouette of the character right at their head. And thing is, the sky doesn't have to be bright at all. Like, at least not that particular part. We need this perfect look of our character, and we're not gonna stop. Another thing I really felt a bit weird about is this sharp straight line of a shadow from the helmet. Since overall I can see the lighting is going like truly from the top, and there's not a lot of this kind of angle on the cloth in here and everything, so I think the light is exactly from the top. And it makes sense, I think it's a good decision. But then this shadow should, you know, it shouldn't be falling just forward like that. It should round up around the helmet's shape. Maybe even show a strong shadow from the horns. That will be greatly appreciated. The thing is, I'm not 100% sure I'm doing exactly what you were going for, but that's because the lighting is kind of vague a bit. You can't 100% put your finger on where the light source is. Is it from the top or from the back? You know, I'm just making my own decision to find the most fortunate look for our character. And I think this much more specific light in here, it will let us show some really cool effects. Like for instance, right now, since I decided it's from the front, I can go for a very sharp highlight on these parts as well, because they will definitely catch some of that light too. So yeah, this shadow right here is like we're setting in stone that our light source is from the top and a little bit from the back, like just a little bit. So the shadow is not exactly on the edge of our scarf in here or whatever it is, but actually falling a bit forward. So the light is slightly from the back, but mostly from the front. And yeah, since you had quite a few areas where you defined really sharp shadows, like on these spikes, that sharp straight shadow from the helmets that we had before, we should actually continue with that and introduce a bit more of that. I think on this arm, we need to also make the shading a bit more specific, you know? And this is like bandages in here, I think, and those have very rough surface. So the shading will be not like on metal, but a very rough dielectric object, meaning non-metal. So we'll have a pretty strong classical shading with terminators and everything. Also, I'll probably work a little bit on the brushwork since it has a lot of this outline context to it, like everywhere, like this rim lighting on the edge and here. Like you still have a little bit of that unconsciously switching to drawing moments or something where you're not sure how exactly to shade a certain thing, you know? But of course, you should always remember that you can shade everything without outlines. A highlight on a sharp scratch like that in the metal, it won't be evenly bright on the whole edge where it's changing angles and everything. No object, especially when it's curving around, will ever have the same color along its full length, you know? So things disappear, just become dark, like these scratches and everything. So in here it should have been like thicker and then getting thinner. And there we go. We have none of that obvious line in there.
So I put a little bit more work into it, and I got from this to this. Now, the original, that was the actual crop of the picture. It actually looks like that. It really feels like it doesn't fit, like I'm zoomed in. So yeah, I'm pretty confident that adding a bit more space over the top of the head of our knight is a really good idea. And yeah, hopefully I didn't change the atmosphere of the environment too much by making it quite darker in here. But I think the character is more important in this case. We're showcasing the character, as you said. I played around quite a lot with the way light can actually hit the torso and brought like brighter highlights in here and added some more shadows with this sort of a line of the projected shadow from his cape onto the chest. And yeah, defined the bandages a bit better and worked quite a lot on the sky and the reflections a little bit. I think it turned out pretty well. And now next and final patient, Ylva Winter. I'm not sure how to pronounce Ylva, but I think it's Ylva. Hi Ylva. Hey Boro, I've been following your channel for a while and I always loved your overpaints. They inspire me to level up my pieces. Well, apparently you did a lot of that, because I had no idea what to do with the submission. I really want feedback on this painting. I feel like it is lacking depth and that the skin is too smooth. Also, I think some of the facial anatomy is wonky. I would like to hear your thoughts on the flow of the piece and how I could improve my materials and textures. Edit. This is Senna from the League of Legends. She can turn into the dark mist around her. I imagine this is the instance where she comes back to her human form and the mist is leaving her body. So let's see what I could possibly improve here.
Alright, Ylva, your artwork is really cool. Really awesome colors, contrast, and just dynamics of everything. The shape design of everything is really cool, so that's really awesome. I wouldn't change anything about the composition or anything, but stuff I would change is probably the shading on the hood. It's really weird, like this whole part is lit with almost the same brightness, while the curvature on it is actually pretty strong. So I would go ahead and try to shade down the side of it and see how it would work maybe much better this way, kind of leaving it for the top lighting mostly and the rim lighting really overexposing over there, which is looking just fine. And yeah, generally I would look a bit more into the geometry of it, because some folds seem to have place, like this curvature in here means there's a folding in of the surface, so it should be kind of darker in there. Now let's talk about the face. Overall, the anatomy is great. I can't help but notice there's actual photo texture of the face, like especially on the eyelid. It was just there. So it's pretty much like a photo of a face painted over, I think. But I guess it was manipulated quite a lot, so that's why you're not sure about the anatomy. I know, I think anatomy is just fine. The only thing is maybe a little bit of values need to be changed. I really felt like this jaw in here should get a stronger gradient, getting darker. Then the chin right here, it really feels flat and vague in this area. And I would define much more specifically the darker part, like the darker half, the bottom half, not getting too much light, and the brighter half needs to be brighter. I haven't seen a lot of faces in my life where the chin wouldn't be another really bright spot on the face. It needs to be bright. That's why maybe the face looks a bit weird, because something's missing at the bottom. And since we have the light from this part, or maybe not so much of a light, but some kind of light source that is giving us a bit of a highlight in there too. And dark skin has a lot more reflections than what white skin has, giving us this really cool dynamic gradients everywhere. Yeah, overall I noticed you're probably kind of struggling with the chin. It feels like it was just blended away at all. Maybe it didn't turn out well and you just blended it away and tried to just keep it somehow less noticeable, which is a good strategy if it doesn't work out, you know. Lower the contrast on it as much as you can. And yeah, maybe I would make a bit of a stronger, this cheekbone line. I think it would look pretty cool in here, especially considering the hood is at the top, so the light would have a much higher chance getting there, not so much from the top, but a bit from the front. A little bit of the shading from the hair as well. And overall, I added a bunch of specific highlights to the geometry. So in here we get little bits that define those planes, also on the nose. But of course, all of this requires more precise work, considering the level of polish in this artwork. You asked about the texture of the skin of the face kind of thing, right? I'm not sure you need the actual texture of the skin, although you did go for this really rough texture. Like, you can definitely define it with highlights and some terminators and everything, just the way you did in here, and this part getting a very strong contrast. So you can add that kind of stuff. Probably you could be using like a texturized brush to define, so in here there would be another area for that. But really, I think in terms of painting, shading, if you simply use the actual brush that shows the sharp brushwork, after you're done defining the values just right by carefully adding accurate brushwork here and there, you get just the, the texture of your brushwork, and that will be just enough. Well, that's at least my approach on that. Because aside from that, yeah, I would say add these highlights and this texture, but you already did that. The problems begin when you use a smooth brush, so just don't use it. Even though it seems like it's very easy to define certain shading with a smooth brush, it takes practice and everything. You can define everything with just a sharp brush, which is something I usually do, but admittedly, I don't do a lot of female portraits, so So yeah, so far, I'm not sure if I made it better or worse. I'll search it a bit more, but before that, I mean, what exactly motivated you to make these highlights on the hair? It really feels like it's breaking out of everything in this picture. This is one of those areas where just using completely different medium, so to speak, instead of using brushes, you use like lasso, I think? I think it's breaking the overall quality of the picture. Everything has one look, one language, and then suddenly these highlights are something completely different. Same as you did with the highlight on the nose that has a lot of texture in it. That's an important thing about highlights overall. Never simplify highlights. Simplify shadows instead. Shadows are something to simplify. So yeah, I would say while overall the definition of these braids right here, it's very low, that's okay. You can just put a little bit of effort exactly in the highlights, and they will bring the translation for the simplified shapes in the dark. The eye will be fine with just imagining the same detail in the darker area, and that's generally how the shading works in terms of bringing more definition in the bright parts and especially highlights.
So yeah, in the end, I did these changes. I'm still wondering what's this photo underpainting stuff was about, because it really feels like it's a full photo of a face. It used to be in some areas. But maybe it's kind of photo bashed, I don't know. Ilva, if you're here, tell me what exactly you did with that, because I can't let it go. But yeah, pretty much, I really like the picture. It all looks just fine. I'm not even sure that making the shading on the hood right here was that good of an idea, because overall, the hood was looking really white, and this way it just looks less white, kind of weird. Well, maybe if I would do it more accurately. But yeah, most of the details I did, I just tried to do what you could do yourself by spending more time with the details around the face. Like the hair, I just detailed it a bit more. And obviously I wasn't using the lasso. I think that was a poor idea, but you probably knew that as well. So really, I don't know, this picture was just really good on its own. And I kinda made the face just more matte, less shiny, and that's pretty much it. I still kinda like the way I changed the highlight in this part, the cheekbone, because right now in comparison this feels a bit more natural and appropriate, while maybe I should have made it a bit shinier, like a higher contrast somewhere. But yeah, this is it. This is all the submissions for April. Thank you guys very much for your submissions. This was a whole lot of fun to work on. Well, admittedly, I got a little bit overwhelmed these 2 weeks since I had to work on 2 giant overpaints in a row to catch up with everything. But from now on, it's just gonna be 1 overpaint in the beginning of a month, and that's it. I think it's gonna be much better and more consistent. If any of you guys want me to overpaint your picture like this, the link to my Patreon page is in the end of this video. You become my patron in the overpaint tier, then go to the community feed and submit your picture with a message. I read the message and overpaint the picture. And also about the art mentorship, it's sold out already. I'm sorry. I was planning to promote it every beginning of the month as well, like in this video, for the mentorship, but it was already sold out literally on the midnight of the May 1st. So yeah, you see it's showing only 1 left. I actually have 4 people right now because some of them subscribed in the previous month already, so I had to stop it. So it's unpublished right now. You won't be seeing this mentorship tier, but don't worry, it still exists. It's still a thing. I'm just gonna be only showing it when it's actually time for that. Also, in the mentorship, I notice overall I tend to learn more from you guys than you learn from me. Which is probably an expected side effect. So anyway, this is it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye! Man, this was just a whole lot of work. I really felt like I worked out all the 2 weeks as an artist and everything. Actually really cool. But I think now I need to chill for a day or two.